When I walked into the bathroom, a glimmer on the carpet caught my attention, a flicker of sunlight sneaking through the blinds. Curious, I paused, barefoot, careful not to step on anything sharp. Emma hadn't mentioned dropping anything in here, but you can never be too sure. A small foil circle lay almost hidden against the carpet's color, only visible when the light hit it just right. I knelt and picked it up. It was the backing from a pill strip, the kind left behind when a pill is pushed out. Flipping it over, I noticed the number 2 printed on one side. Tuesday. Since today was Wednesday, it looked like yesterday's pill. I don't take any medications myself. I'm healthy at 35, as is my wife Emma. We both recently passed our annual checkups without issue. So why was there a pill backing in our bathroom? A few possibilities came to mind, but the birth control pill stood out. 2 years ago, after our second child, I had a vasectomy, and Emma stopped taking the pill, or so I thought. She's never had trouble with her cycle, so I couldn't think of another reason she'd start again. For a moment, I considered whether she might be hiding a health issue, but that didn't add up. We'd both been given clean bills of health recently. If the pill foil was here, then the pills themselves had to be nearby. I locked the door and started searching. It didn't take long. I found them tucked inside a box of tampons, hidden beneath a bottle of aspirin. It was the same brand she used before my surgery, when we were trying to avoid a third pregnancy. So why had she started taking them again? There was only one explanation that made sense, and it hit me like a blow to the stomach. Emma could be seeing someone else. Someone who could get her pregnant. Emma and I have been together for 9 years. We met at a coffee shop when I was fresh out of university, studying to become an engineer. She was working as an assistant at the time. It wasn't love at first sight, but after some persistence on my part, she agreed to dinner. Emma is tall, almost as tall as my 5 feet 10 inches, with an athletic build and striking brown eyes. She's always carried herself with quiet confidence, something that drew me in from the start. We married a year later when I was 26 and eventually had 2 children, now 5 and 2. After the second, we decided our family was complete, and I underwent a vasectomy. From the outside, we had a perfect life, or so I thought. Emma returned to work after her maternity leaves, staying dedicated to her job despite the high cost of childcare. I co-founded an engineering firm with a couple of friends. While we weren't rich, we were comfortable. After finding the pill foil, I carefully placed it back where I'd found it. I needed time to think. Confronting her immediately wouldn't accomplish anything. I needed a clear plan and, more importantly, evidence. My mind raced with questions. Who was she seeing? How long had it been going on? Was it someone from her office? And the hardest question, were my children really mine? Despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me, betrayal, anger, fear, I forced myself to stay calm. I decided to focus on gathering facts first. That evening, I went online and ordered a DNA test kit to discreetly confirm the children's paternity. I also purchased surveillance tools, small voice recorders for her car and bag, and hidden cameras for the house. Accessing her phone posed a challenge, but I knew of a cloning tool that could replicate all her messages, calls, and emails. However, it required me to purchase a second phone, which would take a few days to arrive. Until then, I paid closer attention to her behavior. Emma acted completely normal. Our intimate life was as consistent as ever, routine, once or twice a week, usually on weekends. There were no sudden showers after coming home or suspicious changes in her schedule. If she was cheating, she was either exceptionally careful or had been doing it so long that it felt natural. By Friday, the packages arrived at my office. I received the DNA kits, surveillance devices, and the new phone. I left work early, telling my colleagues I had a personal matter to attend to. When I got home, the nanny was finishing up dinner with the kids. I quietly installed the hidden cameras, one in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom, angled for a clear view of the bed. Later that evening, after putting the kids to bed, I collected DNA samples from both children and myself. I mailed the tests the following morning. Emma came home on schedule that night, and everything unfolded as it always did. We chatted over dinner, though I barely listened. Afterward, she took a shower, giving me the opportunity to slip voice recorders into her car and bag and to use the cloning kit on her phone. When I checked the clone, there were no incriminating texts or emails. Either she wasn't cheating, or she was exceptionally good at covering her tracks. The weekend passed without incident. We spent time together as a family, following our usual routines. Yet, despite the normalcy, I couldn't shake the unease that weighed on me. The pill strip in the bathroom wasn't imaginary. The missing days on the pack were real. I just needed to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. On Monday, I told Emma I'd be working from home. She left for the office as usual, giving me the perfect opportunity to retrieve the flash drives from the cameras and review the footage. The bathroom camera confirmed what I already suspected: she was taking the pills. But the bedroom camera revealed something unexpected. On Saturday evening, while I was busy cooking dinner, Emma showered in our en-suite bathroom. As the steam fogged the mirror, she pulled out a second phone, not the one she kept in her bag. She quickly typed out a message before tucking the phone away in the ventilation duct above the vanity. When I checked the vent later, the phone wasn't there, meaning she must have taken it with her when she left the house. This was the first undeniable proof of her suspicious behavior. The next morning, the footage showed her retrieving the phone from the vent and slipping it into her bag before heading to work. That evening, after she returned home and showered, I checked her bag, no phone. Knowing it was likely back in the vent, I went to Sonia's room, where the vent could be accessed more easily, and quietly retrieved it. As I finished cloning the phone and was about to return it, Emma emerged from the shower and walked into Sonia's room, catching me off guard. I was sitting beside Sonia's bed, gently stroking her hair. "Did something happen?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with concern. I shook my head. "No, sometimes I just like to sit with one of them," I whispered. "It reminds me how lucky I am to have such amazing kids." Emma smiled faintly. "You're such a sentimental old man," she teased. "Come on, let's go before you wake her." That night, with the cloned phone safely in hand, I waited until the next morning to review its contents. And when I finally did, my world came crashing down. Tears streamed down my face as I sat at my desk, staring at the messages on the screen. My office phone buzzed, but I ignored it. Eventually, Michelle, my secretary, knocked softly on the door and entered. Michelle, ever professional, always wore neat, modest outfits. Her red hair was pulled back as usual, and her green eyes showed genuine concern. She had always been strictly business with me, though I knew she'd confided in me before about her struggles with another partner at the firm who treated her poorly. "Tell me what's wrong," she said gently, handing me a napkin. Wordlessly, I handed her the cloned phone. The texts between Emma and an unnamed contact detailed secret meetings, intimate encounters, and personal details I had no part in. It was as though Emma had built a private life that didn't include me at all. "Do you know who it is?" Michelle asked, keeping her tone calm and measured. I shook my head. "Not yet," I admitted. "How did you find out?" she inquired. I explained everything: the silver foil in the bathroom, the hidden pills, the second phone. The words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered. Michelle sat quietly, listening as I spoke. At one point, she reached over and held my hand, a first in all our years working together. "You need more information," she said finally. "The DNA results for the children will be here by Wednesday. Can you wait until then?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling torn. She nodded and then changed the subject. "Our team in Portland needs you urgently," she said, pulling out her phone to book a flight. You'll fly out tomorrow and return Thursday. I can't focus on that right now, I said, shaking my head. You'll tell Emma you're leaving for work, she said, typing a quick message on my phone and sending it. Emma responded almost immediately, saying she understood and that she loved me. Michelle handed my phone back and made a call. Lorraine. It's Michelle. Yes, thank you. When are you free? This afternoon. Perfect. See you then. She ended the call and looked at me. Come on, she said briskly, taking charge in a way I was used to from work. It was a strange relief not to have to make decisions myself. When we arrived, Lorraine was waiting for us. She was Michelle's best friend and a divorce lawyer. Lorraine was already handling Michelle's own case, after discovering her husband's affair with an employee. Michelle explained my situation while I sat silently, still in shock. This wasn't supposed to be my life. Lorraine listened attentively before leaning forward. Gary, do you have a plan? She asked, her tone serious. Her question snapped me out of my daze. My mind, trained to problem solve, sprang into action. I want to take them both down, I said coldly. To my surprise, Michelle smirked. Okay, Lorraine said, her voice steady. I get it. But legally, that's not going to work. Let's talk options. She laid them out clearly. 1. Do nothing and carry on as if nothing happened, for the sake of peace. 2. Pursue an amicable divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. This would mean dividing assets and agreeing on child support. 3. Go nuclear, sue for infidelity, contest paternity, and fight for as much as possible. Option 1 was out of the question. I couldn't live like that. Option 2 felt too soft after everything I'd sacrificed for this family. My thoughts raced as I considered the nuclear option. Option 3, I declared firmly. Nuclear, Lorraine repeated with a knowing grin. All right then, I'll start filling out the paperwork. I suggest you begin covertly surveilling Emma to gather more evidence, find out who, when, and where. We need more proof to strengthen your case. Can I keep this phone? It's not doing you much good now. I nodded and handed it over without hesitation. Michelle and I left Lorraine's office in silence. She drove me to a small, family-run hotel nearby and booked me a room. Go shower and order something to eat, she instructed with her usual no-nonsense tone. I'll bring you some essentials later. I moved mechanically, barely aware of my surroundings. My life was unraveling, and now I was sitting in a hotel room, staring blankly at the menu for room service. Ordering dinner felt like an automated process, a small task to keep my hands busy while my mind spiraled. 9 years of marriage gone in an instant. What stung the most wasn't just the betrayal, it was my ignorance. How had I missed all the signs? Was it her boss? The one she always returned to after each child, claiming her job was her independence. Had that been a convenient excuse all along? I stared at the minibar, tempted to drown my thoughts in whiskey, when Michelle returned. Don't even think about it, she warned sharply, noticing where my eyes had landed. You need a clear head. Drowning your sorrows won't help. A clear head? For what? Planning? I asked bitterly. I had a plan. A loving wife. 2 kids. A stable life. And now what? I'm a betrayed man who might not even be a father to his own children. My life is in ruins, and you're asking me to plan? She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, then checked her watch. All right, she said briskly. Pity party's over. Remember when we were starting the company, and everything that could go wrong did? What does this have to do with anything? I asked, frustrated. Answer the question, she pressed. What happened when our plans fell apart then? I sighed. We improvised. Adjusted course. Kept fighting. Exactly, she said. And back then, why didn't you give up? Because I had something to fight for, I admitted. People depending on me. A vision worth pursuing. Michelle nodded, her voice softening. You still do, Gary. You have a family, even if it looks different now, and 141 employees whose livelihoods rely on you keeping it together. If Emma takes half of everything, she could sell it to the highest bidder. And guess who'd be first in line? Headingley. Her words hit me hard. Headingley, the rival who tried to crush us when we first launched, would love nothing more than to take everything I'd worked for. I won't let that happen, I said firmly. Good, she replied, her lips curling into a small, approving smile. That's the Gary I need right now, someone who plans for the future. We spent the rest of the evening strategizing. My first thought was to sell my shares to my partners, but Michelle quickly vetoed the idea, pointing out that they could mismanage or dismantle the company once they gained control. Instead, she suggested creating an offshore trust. I'd sell the company to the trust at market value, remain on as CEO with a nominal salary, and shield the assets from any local claims. The plan was bold, but it made sense. On paper, I'd become a millionaire while maintaining control of the business. We also discussed liquidating my 401k and tapping into home equity. Since I had bought the house in my name before Emma returned to work, I had a solid chance of retaining it, or at least reducing its value in any settlement. I compiled a list of tasks and arranged to meet my lawyer, Brian Spencer, the next day. Brian had handled the company's legal matters for years, and I trusted him implicitly. The next morning, Emma messaged me, asking about my sudden departure. I replied vaguely, assuring her I'd be back Thursday but withholding any warmth. Michelle arrived early with coffee and a determined expression. After a quick shower, we had breakfast at a diner near the bank. My mind felt clearer, focused on the steps ahead. Brian had a meeting slot available at 10 a.m., but Michelle suggested we visit the bank first to access my 401k and home equity. Won't there still be a record of my assets? I asked, hesitant. The court could order me to split them with Emma, couldn't it? Not if you don't have them anymore, Michelle said with a mischievous grin. That's where Vegas comes in. Vegas? I echoed, confused. After consolidating your capital, spend a week there and burn through it all, on paper, of course, before filing for divorce. When the courts see your finances, you'll appear broke, deeply in debt, and struggling to make ends meet. If the children are yours, you can place your 401k in a trust for their college funds. Emma won't be able to touch it, and she might even end up paying you alimony. Her plan was unconventional, but it wasn't without merit. When do you expect the DNA results? She asked as we left the diner. I hesitated, pulling out my phone. The company said they'd be online today. I opened the email with the link but froze, unable to bring myself to click it. Want me to check? Michelle asked gently. I handed her the phone, and she scrolled through the email before looking up. The results aren't in yet, she said. They should arrive within 12 hours. I nodded, a mix of relief and dread washing over me. Let's go, Michelle said, her voice brisk again. The bank should be open by now. Releasing the equity from my house and cashing out my 401k went smoothly. I closed all our savings accounts, including the children's college funds, transferring the money into a new account solely in my name. I left the joint account untouched, holding less than $10,000, so it wouldn't raise immediate suspicions. When Michelle and I met with Brian, our company lawyer, he raised a critical point. You forgot something, he said. You have a marriage contract. I do. I asked, genuinely surprised. Yes, he replied. It's part of the partnership agreement you signed when the company was founded. All partners were required to sign a prenup to protect the company in case of a marital split. It only covers company assets, not personal ones. As an employee, your wife can only claim your salary and 401k, nothing else. That's unexpected, I said, processing this information. What I suggest, Brian continued, without undermining your divorce lawyer's plan, is that you invest all the equity freed up from your house into the company. Use it to buy out one of your partners. Robert seems particularly interested in cashing out. You may need a loan from the company pension fund to cover the difference. Your repayments can come from a reduced salary, minimizing your assessed assets. Since everything ties back to the company, it remains protected. Your credit rating might take a hit if your house goes into foreclosure, and you'll lose half of the remaining funds in your bank account. Beyond that, your wife won't receive anything significant. And if we adjust your salary to make hers higher, she could end up paying child support. How will I live? I asked. If my entire salary goes toward the loan repayments, I'll still need money for living expenses, for my children and, well, potentially more. Let's hold off on discussing the children for now, Brian advised carefully. Have you decided what you'll do if they're not yours? Will you stay involved in their lives? I don't know, I admitted honestly. It's too overwhelming to think about. I need the facts before I can make that decision. Remember the lawsuit against her company that Lorraine mentioned, Brian reminded me. If successful, it could pay off the loan and restore your full salary. Additionally, if the children aren't biologically yours, you can file a claim for financial compensation against their father, separate from the divorce settlement. Could you reach out to Robert about selling his share? I asked. I'm not sure I can handle that conversation right now. Brian nodded. I'll contact him and keep you updated. As we shook hands and left his office, a brief wave of relief washed over me. The plans were beginning to align, offering a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic situation. But as Michelle and I walked to a nearby diner for lunch, the reality of why we were making these plans hit me again, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. At the diner, I finally dared to check my phone. Opening the email with the DNA results, I hesitated and handed it to Michelle instead. I watched her face carefully, searching for a clue. I'm so sorry, Gary, she said softly, handing the phone back. I read the results myself, my hands trembling. Neither child was biologically mine. Both had the same father. The shock of losing not just one but both children was overwhelming, but it paled in comparison to the rage I felt at Emma's betrayal. She had not only deceived me about their paternity but had also convinced me to undergo a vasectomy. Gary, Michelle snapped, bringing me back to the present. Now is not the time. Stay calm. We'll get through this. Struggling to suppress my anger, I took several deep breaths. Dark thoughts of revenge crossed my mind, including hiring someone to deal with the man who fathered the children I thought were mine. Michelle remained composed, gently leading me out of the diner. As we walked, her phone buzzed. It's Lorraine, she said after answering. She wants to see you immediately. When we arrived at Lorraine's office, her expression was grim. I have a preliminary report from the private investigator, she said. Emma had a visitor last night. A man stayed over at your house. I have cameras at home, I said, the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. I can swap the flash drives and review the footage. Good, Lorraine replied. Do it now, then we'll strategize. This evidence could be crucial. The au pair is with Sophie and James at the play center, I noted. But I can't go back without raising suspicion, I'm supposed to be away on business. Lorraine checked her phone. The au pair is occupied for the next few hours. I'll monitor the situation and alert you if she leaves. Michelle and I sped to my house, a 30-minute drive away. I quickly swapped the flash drives from the cameras, scanned the house for anything unusual, and returned to Lorraine's office. When we reviewed the footage, I avoided the bedroom camera footage at first, dreading what I might see. But there was no escaping the truth. The video confirmed my worst fears. Emma's boss, Bill Wainwright, entered the house with his own key. As if that wasn't enough, James greeted him with a cheerful, "Papa Bill." I broke down, unable to hold back my tears. Michelle, for the first time, pulled me into a hug, holding me as I cried. Lorraine looked on with a mix of sympathy and professionalism, giving me the space to process my emotions. After some time, I straightened up, wiping my face. "Would you like to rest?" Lorraine asked gently. "No," I said firmly. The pain had dulled slightly, replaced by a growing determination. "What's our next move?" Lorraine nodded approvingly. "I've obtained the terms of employment for Emma's company," she said. "There's an anti-fraternization clause in her contract. Since Bill is a senior manager, this gives us solid grounds to sue for breach of contract." We briefed Lorraine on Brian's recommendations, and she immediately called him to coordinate our next steps. Michelle received a copy of the prenuptial agreement via email and scanned through it. "This changes everything," she said, her expression brightening as she read. "Your lawyer's plan is spot on. If Robert agrees to sell, we'll invest everything into the company to shield your assets. Then we can proceed with lawsuits, against her company for non-compliance, against Bill for emotional distress, and against Emma for misrepresentation on the birth certificates and child-related expenses." "It all depends on Robert," I replied. "We'll have to wait for his decision." Michelle drove me back to the hotel. As I unlocked the door to my room, there was a knock. I opened it to find her standing there. "Let's go," she said firmly. "You shouldn't stay here alone." "Why not?" I asked, feeling drained. "Because you'll either brood or raid the minibar," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I need to keep an eye on you." With a resigned sigh, I packed my things and followed her to her car. "Where are we going?" I asked as she drove. "My place," she said. "I've got a spare room you can use." I started to protest, but the look she gave me silenced any argument. When we arrived, I was surprised to see that her house, though single-story, was nearly as large as mine. She showed me to the guest room, complete with its own bathroom. "Take a shower and change," she instructed. "Dinner in 30 minutes." We ate quietly. The food smelled delicious, but I barely tasted it. My mind was a storm of emotions, rage, heartbreak, and a grim determination to see this through. I was running on autopilot, driven by the purpose of executing our plans. After dinner, the phone rang. I flinched, half expecting it to be Emma, but it wasn't. "Hello." I answered, my voice flat. "It's Robert," the voice on the other end said. "Why?" Robert and I had been close friends since university. We'd started the company together after bonding over a project that formed its foundation. I held the majority stake due to a larger initial investment, but we'd always operated as equals. "Emma is cheating on me," I said bluntly. "How long?" he asked, his voice quiet. "All this time," I confirmed. "And neither of the kids are yours?" I hesitated before answering. "No." There was a pause on the line before he spoke again. "So you want to tie everything to the company and rely on the prenuptial agreement?" "Exactly," I replied. "I'll keep 5% and step back as a consulting engineer," he offered. "I'll work it out with HR. The rest is yours." "Okay," I said. "I'll have Brian prepare the paperwork." "Gary," Robert said after a moment. "I'm really sorry. It might not feel like it now, but it will get easier. I've been where you are, and I promise, it does get better." Only then did I recall that Robert had gone through a messy divorce 4 years ago. Though we were close, he'd kept the details private. I now realized he had relied on the marriage contract himself. The next morning, Michelle woke me with a cup of coffee. "Let's go," she said briskly. "We've got a lot to do." Our first stop was Brian's office. He had already prepared the documents for the buyout. The transaction was swift, less than 30 minutes. I liquidated everything, my home equity, savings, and 401k. To cover the remaining amount, I secured a loan against the company pension fund. On paper, I was now nearly $1 million in debt. My salary had been slashed by half to cover the repayments. Next, we headed to Lorraine's office. She reviewed the documents with satisfaction. "This is perfect," she said. "I'll draft the divorce papers today and file them on Monday." "Where do you want her served?" she asked. "Somewhere that will humiliate her the most," I replied coldly. "If I could do it on a Super Bowl billboard, I'd pay for it gladly." Lorraine chuckled. "We'll serve her at her office," she decided. "Monday morning at 10 a.m., assuming the court clears the papers by then." I nodded. "So, what's next?" Michelle asked, ever the strategist. "We have a couple more stops," Lorraine said. "After that, you'll return to the office and act like you've just put out a fire in Portland. Can you hold out at home until Monday?" "I'll have to," I replied, resigned. "Good. Let's get moving." To my surprise, our next stop was the medical center where I'd had my vasectomy. "Why are we here?" I asked, confused. "Didn't you say you wanted good news?" Michelle teased. Inside, she arranged for me to see my doctor, Dr. Harrington, almost immediately. Though I gestured for Michelle to join me in the consultation room, she hesitated before nodding and stepping inside. Dr. Harrington greeted me with a calm professionalism, not commenting on Michelle's presence. "Gary," he began, "I understand you're inquiring about a vasectomy reversal. Is that really possible?" I asked, my voice tinged with hope. "Yes," he assured me. "The success rate for reversals performed within 3 years is around 95%, and even after that, the odds remain quite high. The procedure involves general anesthesia and a longer recovery period, but there's a strong chance you could father children again." Tears welled up in my eyes. I glanced at Michelle, who offered a small, encouraging smile. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. The possibility of becoming a father again filled me with cautious hope. "I understand it's a lot to take in," Dr. Harrington said, handing me a folder containing information about the procedure and its costs. He noted it wasn't covered by insurance. "If you decide to proceed, we can schedule some preliminary tests." "Thank you, Doctor," Michelle interjected, taking the paperwork before I could respond. "We'll be in touch." She stood, and I followed her out of the clinic. "Well? Is this good news enough for you?" she asked softly, a small smile on her lips. Without thinking, I hugged her, the gesture impulsive but heartfelt. "Thank you," I murmured into her hair before pulling back abruptly. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Gary," she reassured me, her voice gentle. We got into her car, and she started the engine. One more stop, then we're heading back to the office. The next stop caught me off guard. Over the years, I had occasionally visited Bill Wainwright's home for work-related gatherings when Emma still worked for him. He and his wife, Stephanie, lived in a gated community just outside the city. The neighborhood was immaculate, with sprawling lawns and well-manicured hedges, designed to project affluence and power. When we arrived, Stephanie was expecting us. She greeted us at the door, her expression polite but guarded, and led us to a room that appeared to be Bill's office. She gestured for us to sit and got straight to the point. "How can I help you?" she asked, her eyes fixed on me. I hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, I asked, "Did you know?" Stephanie sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "No," she admitted. "I suspected for years, but I never had proof. Without anything concrete to take to a lawyer, I couldn't act. If I had, I would have taken him for everything he had." "Join the club," Michelle muttered under her breath. Stephanie turned her attention back to me. "Do you have evidence?" I nodded, my throat tightening. Proof that none of my children are mine, I said, my voice trailing off as emotion overwhelmed me. Stephanie's expression softened. I'm so sorry, Gary, she said. She shared how she had long suspected Bill and Emma's affair but had never been able to uncover solid evidence. She expressed regret for not acting sooner, though she admitted her uncertainty had paralyzed her. What are you going to do now? She asked, curiosity evident in her tone. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. While part of me wanted to trust her, I couldn't be sure she wouldn't warn Bill. Ultimately, I decided he deserved to be blindsided, just as I had been. The real question, I replied, is what are you going to do? Stephanie studied me, understanding my caution. Do you have a recommendation for a divorce lawyer? She asked. Michelle handed her a card. This is someone we trust. Thank you, Stephanie said, pocketing the card. Will a week be enough time? I nodded. That should be fine. Stephanie stood, signaling the end of our meeting. She hugged me briefly and kissed my cheek. I'm so sorry, she said again. Then, turning to Michelle, she added, take care of him. He deserves better than what that woman did to him. Michelle winced slightly at Stephanie's affectionate gesture but nodded. We returned to the office, and I spent the rest of the day wrapping up tasks from my supposed Portland trip. By the time I was done, Michelle appeared at my door, her professional mask firmly in place. I'm heading out for the day, she said. Let me know if you need anything. Her return to her usual demeanor left me feeling strangely adrift. Over the past few days, I'd felt a growing connection with her, but now I wondered if it had all been in my head. Good night, I said simply, grateful nonetheless for her help. I worked late into the evening, catching up on everything I'd fallen behind on. Around 8 p.m., Emma messaged me, asking when I'd be home. I replied that I'd need another hour or two to finish up, though I suspected she'd be asleep by the time I arrived. She ended the conversation with a message full of affection and kisses, but I couldn't bring myself to respond in kind. By the time I got home, it was nearly 11 p.m. The house was dark, the silence heavy and oppressive. I checked on Sonia and James, who were both fast asleep, their small faces peaceful. The sight broke me. I retreated to the bathroom to cry in private, overwhelmed by the thought of losing the children I had loved as my own. Despite the betrayal, my love for them remained. How could I abandon them when, just days ago, they were my pride and joy? Now they stood as living reminders of Emma's deceit. I resolved to wait, letting time and circumstances guide my decision about their future. The next morning, I woke to find Emma gone. The housekeeper was tending to the children, but dark thoughts crept into my mind. Had she known the truth all along? Was she complicit in Emma's betrayal? For a fleeting moment, I considered firing her, ensuring she never worked as an au pair again. But I quickly realized my anger was misplaced. She had cared for Sonia and James since before Sonia was born. If she had risked her job to tell me, would I have believed her? At the office, Michelle was already at her desk when I arrived. She had cleared my schedule and greeted me with her usual efficiency, handing me a coffee, a gesture she had never made before. Marketing? I asked, confused. Since when am I involved in that? She grinned, the expression oddly comforting. We need a strategy, she said. The final part of Lorraine's plan came into focus. Go public, Michelle insisted, her voice firm. Tell everyone, her friends, family, colleagues, even her church groups, about what she's done. They need to know who she really is. I shook my head. I'll look like a fool. A betrayed man raising another man's children. They'll ridicule me. Michelle's gaze hardened. You need to control the narrative. If you don't, Caroline will. She'll paint herself as the victim, claim you're abusive or unfit, and people will believe her. But if you speak first, with the truth and evidence, you'll leave her with no defense. Reluctantly, I agreed. Michelle worked tirelessly to compile a media package that included everything: the private investigator's report, DNA test results proving I wasn't the father, and damning footage from my home. I hadn't even seen some of the videos she included, particularly one where James greeted Bill as Papa. I didn't want to watch them. Later that morning, I received an email from Lorraine. Stephanie had provided her with a DNA sample from Bill, which had been compared to the results of the paternity test. It was a match. Bill was the father of both children. Children, I thought bitterly, struggling to think of them as mine anymore. The evidence was finalized and scheduled for delivery to Caroline's parents, my parents, her siblings, and her professional contacts on Facebook and LinkedIn. The packages were timed to arrive on Monday morning, coinciding with another key moment. All I had to do was survive the weekend. Drawing on my engineering background, I devised a plan to ensure distance between Caroline and me. In less than an hour, I built a small device with a motor, timer, and battery that would vibrate after a set duration. Friday evening, after the au pair left, I discreetly slipped the device under Sonia's pillow, setting it to activate at 6 a.m. The next morning, the device worked perfectly. Sonia entered our bedroom early, interrupting any potential closeness. I smirked to myself, keeping busy all Saturday by tackling long overdue tasks around the house. When Caroline remarked on my sudden productivity, I replied casually, they needed doing. That night, when she tried to initiate intimacy, I feigned sleep after she returned from the bathroom. On Sunday, Sonia's interrupted sleep drove her back to Caroline's room. The day was spent at the zoo with the children. I struggled with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Looking at Caroline and the children, I nearly broke down several times, biting my cheek until it bled to maintain composure. By Monday, I was resolute. I told Caroline I'd be working from home, using the excuse of needing to discuss matters with the au pair. As she left for work, I barely acknowledged her farewell. Once she was gone, I noted the time, 8:15. The au pair knocked on my office door soon after, asking if she could take the children to the play center. I declined, surprising her by deciding to keep them home. James pouted but accepted it reluctantly. By 9:30, Michelle arrived, unannounced but welcome. She smiled as I handed her a cup of coffee, the first time I'd made one for her. We joined Lorraine for a scheduled conference call. "Gary," Lorraine began, "this is your last chance to stop. I'm not saying you should, but if you've had a change of heart over the weekend, now is the time to speak up." "No," I replied firmly. "Then I'll see you on the other side," she said. I monitored my email closely, waiting for the confirmations. At 10 a.m. sharp, the first email arrived, followed by the second 3 minutes later and the third 5 minutes after that. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting Caroline, but it was my mother. "Gary," she exclaimed. "Hi, Mom," I said flatly. "What's going on? Did you read the package I sent?" "Yes." "Then you know as much as I do," I replied. "Caroline has been cheating on me, probably our entire marriage, with her boss. The children aren't mine. I'm divorcing her." "Gary, you can't." "Mom, I have to work. I have other calls." I ended the conversation before she could argue further. The phone rang again immediately, this time with Caroline's name on the screen. "Gary," she began, her voice shaky. I stayed silent. "We need to talk," she continued. I still didn't respond. "I'm coming home," she said before hanging up. "Caroline's on her way," I told Michelle. "I'll step out," she offered. I wanted to ask her to stay, but the words wouldn't come. I simply looked at her, and she seemed to understand. "Call me once you know what's happening," she said softly before leaving. About 20 minutes later, I heard Caroline's car pull into the driveway. She didn't bother using the garage, slamming the car door and walking straight into the house. She found me in my office, seated behind my desk. Gary, Not interested, I interrupted, my voice icy. She flinched but tried again. Uninteresting, I corrected. I don't want to hear a single word from you. You lied to me for 9 freaking years, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Neither child is mine. You convinced me to get a vasectomy while you stayed on birth control so you could continue your affair with Bill. Emma's eyes widened, stunned by my words. So, no, I continued coldly. I don't care what you have to say. My lawyer's card is in the package you received when you were served. If there's something you think I need to know, talk to her. Her voice cracked as she asked, what about the children? What children? I retorted. I don't have children. And if it were up to you, I never would have. I took a steadying breath and continued. I could ask why you did this to me, but I don't want to hear another lie. I'm not interested in your excuses, justifications, or reasons. I want this to end so I can salvage what's left of my life and move on. The au pair hovered near the doorway, listening. I gestured for her to come inside. You're fired, I said bluntly. Effective immediately. Leave now. What? She exclaimed, taken aback. Why? Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Emma. You knew she was having an affair with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids weren't mine, but you definitely knew something. I have video evidence of you discussing the children with Bill. Get out. Gary, you can't fire her, Emma interjected. I pay her salary. The au pair looked at Emma with gratitude. Fine, I conceded. But I've already contacted the agency to report your complicity in an extramarital affair. If Emma wants to keep you, she'll have to handle your salary, taxes, vacation, pension, sick leave, and insurance on her own. The au pair turned pale. Losing her job and being blacklisted by the agency would make finding new domestic work nearly impossible. Now get out, I told her sharply. She hurried away without another word. Did you have to do that? Emma asked, her voice trembling. You're talking again, I replied coldly. I told you, I don't want to hear it. What I want is for you to gather your things, take your kids, and leave my house. This is my home too, she insisted. No, I interrupted, my voice rising. The house is registered solely in my name. Until the courts say otherwise, get out. My raised voice startled her, and just then, James entered the room. Mommy, he said, tugging at her arm. Sonia fell. Emma, tears streaming down her face, stood up and walked toward Sonia. I closed my office door, refusing to watch as she packed. A few minutes later, she reappeared, holding Sonia in her arms. Are you going to say goodbye to her? Emma asked, her voice shaking. Not like this, I said, my tone unyielding. She's not my daughter, and he's not my son. Take them to Papa Bill and let him take care of his children. They have nothing to do with me. Gary, Get out. I heard the front door close and, moments later, her car started. She was gone. I finally exhaled, feeling as though I'd been holding my breath for hours. Exhausted, I collapsed into a chair. I didn't hear the door open and jumped when arms wrapped around me. I buried my head in my hands, but looking up, I saw Michelle holding me. She pulled me close, and I broke down, sobbing into her embrace. It took a long time for me to compose myself. I had just thrown away 9 years of my life, my marriage, my children, everything I thought I had built. I can't do this, I murmured. Yes, you can, Michelle said firmly, taking charge once again. Let's go. Lorraine said it could take Emma about 4 hours to get an emergency order to occupy the house. She'll be back. Do you really want to let her throw you out of your own home? We gathered clothes, important documents, and a few personal belongings. My car and Michelle's car were soon packed, and we left. First, we stopped at the office. Later that day, Lorraine called to update me on the proceedings. "There's an emergency order granting Emma temporary occupancy of the house," she explained, her tone carefully neutral. "There's also a restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 100 meters of the property. If you need to retrieve anything, you'll have to schedule it through her attorney, at your own expense." The weight of the situation settled on me as I found myself staying in Michelle's spare room. My clothes were neatly hung in her closet, and my documents organized in her office cabinets. A week passed. I worked during the day and returned with Michelle in the evenings to her home for dinner and sleep. She maintained a professional demeanor, except for the occasional comforting smile or touch. On Monday morning, we met with the lawyers representing Emma and Bill's employer. Lorraine had filed a claim that demanded an amount far exceeding what the company's insurance could cover, capped at $1 million. The lawyers on the other side were composed and professional, but Lorraine's confidence was palpable. "What's the next step?" their lawyer inquired, his tone brisk. Lorraine smiled, a sharp glint in her eyes. "That depends on your client's willingness to cooperate. Immediate and permanent dismissal of the senior member, with the loss of pension benefits," Lorraine stated firmly to Bill's employer's lawyers. "Additionally, Caroline remains employed for 3 years and receives a payout of $1.5 million. I tuned out as the negotiations continued. It felt surreal that the lives of people who had so thoroughly upended mine were now being bartered over like commodities. Eventually, they reached an agreement. My share was reduced to $750,000, which would help cover my debt to the company's pension fund. "Payment will follow finalization of the divorce," Lorraine said, and the lawyers nodded. Later that day, we met with Bill Wainwright's lawyers. After another round of discussions, I left their office with an additional $500,000. This allowed me to fully repay the pension loan and keep a small reserve for the aftermath of the divorce. My final meeting was with Caroline's lawyers. She was present, sitting stiffly across the table but avoiding my gaze. Michelle and Lorraine flanked me, their presence a shield of confidence. "The financial claims in the divorce petition are outrageous," her lawyer began. "Your client is the CEO and majority shareholder of a company valued at approximately $20 million. Not to mention his personal assets, savings." "Allow me to interrupt," Lorraine interjected, sliding papers across the table. "According to the prenuptial agreement signed by all parties, the company is not divisible in divorce. My client has recently made a substantial investment in another company, depleting most of his savings, 401k, and home equity. Additionally, he borrowed from the company's pension fund, and as a result, his salary has been reduced. He now earns less than your client, and we will be seeking interim support while he stabilizes." "And the children?" Caroline's lawyer asked. "DNA evidence has proven they are not his," Lorraine replied. "Your client falsified birth records to name my client as their father. Furthermore, we are pursuing damages for coercing him into a surgical sterilization under false pretenses of paternity. Your client can either accept the divorce terms as presented, vacate the marital home, and receive half of the joint account, currently valued at $9,443.15, or we proceed to court." The lawyer reviewed the documents, then glanced at Caroline, whose face had turned pale. Finally, he looked at me. "Gary, please," Caroline said, her voice trembling. 9 years, I said quietly, my voice heavy with emotion. 9 damn years. Day after day, you lied to me. There's nothing you can say that I want to hear." Caroline's shoulders sagged as she looked at her lawyer and nodded. She signed the papers without further protest. I wasn't there when she left the house. Instead, I received a formal letter from her lawyer confirming the lifting of the restraining order and the transfer of the house back into my name. Though I contemplated returning, the memories were too painful. I listed it for sale. While the proceeds didn't fully cover my remaining bank debt, I managed to bridge the gap, leaving the bank satisfied. 2 months passed, and I was still living in Michelle's spare room. Since the divorce, Caroline had moved back in with her parents. Despite the evidence I presented, her family staunchly supported her and refused to communicate with me, not that I considered it a loss. For reasons I didn't understand, Stephanie hadn't followed through on her promise to divorce Bill. Instead, they sold their house in the gated community and moved into a modest apartment. Bill had managed to secure another job through his connections, though his income was a far cry from what it had been. I hadn't seen Stephanie since our meeting at her lawyer's office and had no desire to. One afternoon at work, Michelle knocked on my office door and entered without waiting for a response. "Bill Wainwright is dead," she announced bluntly. "What?" I exclaimed, sitting up in shock. "How?" "Apparently, Stephanie caught him with Caroline again," Michelle explained. "She shot him." I leaned back in my chair, a wide grin spreading across my face. Despite my efforts to suppress it, the smile wouldn't fade. "That couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," I finally remarked. Michelle chuckled. "Are you mad at me for feeling happy about this?" I asked her. "Not at all," she replied firmly. "That idiot got exactly what he deserved. By the way," she added, "this just arrived." She placed an official envelope on my desk. We both knew what it was. My heart raced as I opened it. "That's it," I said quietly, staring at the contents. "I'm finally a free man." "Finally," Michelle echoed. Unexpectedly, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a brief, platonic gesture. It was full and passionate, leaving me breathless and stunned. When she pulled back, I leaned into my chair, tense and speechless. "For 9 years," she began softly, her voice steady. "I've been by your side. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. You never once looked at me inappropriately or made advances, and I admired you for that. I've been waiting for this moment, and now that you're free, I want to show you that not all women are deceitful. We make a great team, Gary. I know you inside and out, just as any wife knows her husband. And you know me too. Please, give me a chance to prove that." I was overwhelmed. Memories of our time together, her unwavering support, and her presence during my darkest days flooded my mind. I realized then that I had genuine feelings for Michelle. After working so closely together for so long, especially during my marriage, it was inevitable. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. I stared at her, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. "How many?" I asked. Confusion flickered across her face. "How many what?" "Children," I clarified. "How many children should we have?"